mindfulness that we heard about yesterday that's concerned with purpose, that's concerned with meaning, that's concerned with life's direction or kind of overarching aim or goal. I think Dharma Maya described it yesterday as holding the bigger picture in view, or kind of zooming out and seeing things from a broader perspective. So I thought I'd start just by saying something about purpose and how I've experienced a sense of purpose throughout my life. So I always have felt like life is meaningful, like there is a point to life and that there's something that I'm here to do. Life has a purpose. I think I've always believed that. And I think I've even been quite successful in keeping purpose in view and even integrating my energies in order to actually pursue something in particular. But the problem that I've had is that the way I've envisaged that purpose has changed quite frequently at different points in my life. So I'm just going to give you a very brief life story. A life story of purpose. So as a young boy of about 10 or 11, all I needed to do with my life, so I thought, was become a professional football player. That was it. So I just had to play football all the time, and I did. I played football before school, during school, after school, at weekends. If I wasn't playing it, I was talking about it, I was watching it, I was reading about it. That's all I needed to do, was become a professional footballer. I did okay, did become quite good, but I never lived up to that aim of becoming a professional. So one of the reasons for that was that at the age of about 14, I discovered the music of the Beatles. This was my brother's doing. He brought home a CD one day. I said, "What are you bringing that home for? It's something our dad would listen to." But then I heard it and I was absolutely entranced by this music. So at that point I decided, okay, all I needed to do was to get a guitar, learn to play it, join a band and become a rock star. So I learnt my first song, Day Tripper. Anyone know that? It's got that lovely riff. So I would play that riff over and over again. And I have to really thank my dad for his encouragement in becoming a bit more proficient at the guitar, because one day I was there playing Day Tripper over and over again. He came up to me and he said, "Will you please learn another song?" So I did. I learnt another song, I learnt many songs, even started writing songs, joined a band, did okay, but never became the professional rock star of my dreams. So one of the reasons for that was that at 18 I went to university and I studied history. History of piracy was in there. Again, I enjoyed it. It was something I enjoyed. I did quite well at it. I ended up getting this scholarship to do a PhD. And believe it or not, studying pirates in the Caribbean in the 19th century for several years. And at that point, I'd started to see my life's purpose more professionally as becoming a brilliant scholar, becoming a professor of history, elbow patches, all that kind of thing, big grey beard. That hasn't happened either. So one of the reasons for that is that at the age of 27, I discovered the Dharma. So upon coming into contact with Buddhism, I quickly realised that that was my life's purpose, was to practice the Dharma, was to emulate the Buddha, was to go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So I asked for ordination, asked to join the Triratna Buddhist order, and that has happened. So earlier this year, I became a member of the Triratna Buddhist order. And at the time of ordination, I took 4 vows. So all order members take these specific vows. So they are to live in harmony with friends and brethren, to act with loyalty towards one's teachers, to practice towards the attainment of enlightenment, and to do that for the benefit of all beings. So they're the 4 ordination vows. And I think they quite adequately encapsulate how I now envisage the purpose of my life, what I believe the purpose of my life is. So even though I've been on this journey, dedicating myself to one thing, and then another thing, and then another thing, I do feel confident that this time I've found the thing. I've found the thing that I do need to do with my life, its true purpose. And I think that that's true this time because what I'm pursuing is what the Buddha called the Arya Pariyesana, the noble quest. So those previous pursuits, pleasant as they were ultimately part of what the Buddha called the ignoble quest. So they were worldly pursuits, they were ends in themselves. Whereas the Dharma life is something transcendental. So its orientation and direction is transcendental. It's about moving beyond the worldly winds of pleasure and pain, of fame and infamy, etc. And instead it's about discovering the way things truly are and helping others to do the same. So I believe that the true purpose, the reason I'm here, is to be a Dharmachari, is to practice the Dharma and to help others to do that. So now I'll start to say something about how I experience mindfulness of that purpose, how I'm aware of that purpose. And I have to say at this point, in preparing the talk and reflecting on this theme, I just started to find it increasingly mysterious. So it's quite a profound and deep subject, mindfulness. And when Dave introduced it yesterday, he said it includes but is much more than colouring in. And it's something that is really quite vast. And then Dharma Mai, in her talk, she described it as just really exciting. You know, when you start to actually look into it, you see that it's a really exciting topic. So I'll add to that just by saying that I find it really mysterious. So I think mindfulness generally is mysterious. The fact that we are aware is a great mystery. So I'll give you an example. I'm sure you'll all have experienced this. You could be sat in meditation. Let's say we're doing the mindfulness of breathing. And you've been distracted, but then all of a sudden, you're just back. You're aware. And it's not that you've decided to become aware. That's just happened. So it's almost like awareness descends on us. Yeah? And it's not that we decide to be distracted either. We kind of get caught up and that's what happens, and then, boom, awareness comes back. So I just find that really profoundly mysterious. And I think that's true of Sampajanna as well, this mindfulness of purpose. So my experience is that I'll become aware, and there's something of awareness of purpose in that moment. So it's not like I suddenly start to think, oh yeah, what's my purpose? The 4 vows. It's not like that. It's just in that moment of awareness, there's this sense of purpose there. So it's more like a kind of force or a momentum or an energy that I experience in a moment of awareness. So the question that I started to ask myself then was not, what is it that I do to be specifically aware of the purpose of my life moment by moment? I don't think you could do that. I think if we tried to do that, it would probably be a distraction from the things that we actually need to do, like brush our teeth and make our breakfast. You know, if we were trying to rigidly be aware of the 4 vows or however we conceive our purpose to be, it just wouldn't really work. So the question I started asking myself was more like, what is it that I do that generates a sense of momentum in me, that means in those moments of awareness there's a kind of automatic tuning into practicing for the benefit of all beings, practicing towards enlightenment. It's kind of the in there. So to put it more metaphorically, what are the seeds that I plant in my mind that mean at moments of awareness and clarity there's already a sense of purpose kind of blossoming there? So the first thing to say in that respect is that as a Triratna Buddhist, I follow the Triratna system of practice taught by Sangha. And that's a really rich and varied system. So we endeavour to live ethically, we do specific meditation practices, we study the Dharma, we practice spiritual friendship, we explore the arts and culture. So it's this really rich and varied system of practice. And I think all of that combined helps to keep me moving in the direction of awakening, helps to keep me growing spiritually, growing in the Dharma, and helps keep me aware that that is the overarching purpose of my life. But I think for me personally, there are some specific things that I do within that do help to generate this strong sense of purpose, this momentum that I've spoken about. So I'm just going to pick out 4 things and tell you about 4 different things. So the first one I've called hero worship. So I find that I draw really great inspiration from reading about, dwelling upon, and reflecting on the lives of great Buddhist figures, great Buddhist heroes, you could say. So the foremost being the Buddha Shakyamuni. So I just find the Buddha's life story really captivating, really entrancing, enchanting. So there's all these great events in the life of the Buddha. So there's the going forth after seeing the 4 sights, seeing old age, sickness, death, seeing somebody living a holy life, and the Buddha emulates that, goes forth into that way of life too. And then there's this whole process of learning from teachers, learning how to experience higher states of consciousness. Then there's the period of asceticism. Then there's the whole battle with Mara beneath the Bodhi tree and the actual seeing of things as they really are. There's the great vision of beings like lotuses, all in different stages of development. Compassion arises, and then there's the going back into the world, establishing an order of disciples and teaching the Dharma for the rest of his life. It's just a really inspiring, captivating story with all these twists and turns. So I guess just in the same way that I've been obsessed by football, been obsessed by music, been obsessed by pirates, in the last couple of years I've been obsessed by the Buddha, you could say. Really dwelt upon that life story, reflected on that life story. And there have been other Buddhist figures too, and I don't really have time to tell you about them all, but people like Shantideva, so we heard some quotes from Shantideva in the talks yesterday. The Japanese poet Ryokan, living a hermit's life in Japan and writing this beautiful poetry. All really inspiring examples of people with a strong sense of purpose, and that purpose specifically being awakening and living for the benefit of all beings. But I will just say something about Bhante Sangharajta. So he's another particular hero of mine, and somebody whose life I like to read about and dwell upon. So again, he's had a really fascinating life, going to India, in the army initially in the 40s, going forth from that life, learning his passport, donning a robe, and just being a wanderer in India for many years. Learning from different teachers, deepening his own experience of the Dharma, then eventually coming back to Britain, establishing a new Buddhist movement, and essentially that's why we're sat here today in Sheffield Buddhist Centre. So I think reading these life stories, being captivated by these life stories, reflecting on them, it really helps to reveal their sense of purpose, their sense of direction. So the Buddha's sense of purpose, Sangharajta's sense of purpose. It becomes apparent that they're really determined, have a lot of conviction to live that way of life. They love the Dharma life. They love the Buddhist life. They love a life dedicated to awakening for the benefit of all. And I find that I can become so absorbed in the life of these heroes that it's almost as if our lives start to intertwine somehow. So their purpose becomes my purpose as I'm contemplating the story. So in those moments of awareness that I spoke about, where we suddenly find ourselves aware, I think having those heroes in mind just helps remind me of what that purpose is. So again, it's not literally that I sit there and imagine all these people and bring their lives to mind. It's more that because I've dwelt on them in the past, there is this momentum where they're kind of there. So I hope that makes sense. It is this kind of mysterious process, I find. But anyway, it gives me this impulse to carry on aspiring myself to emulate their examples. So one thing I thought people might like to reflect on, either to take into groups or just to reflect on in your own time, is who are your heroes? Whose lives do you find yourself being drawn to? What effects does dwelling on their lives have upon your own life? What influence does it have? So I think the second thing that I find reinforces my sense of purpose is spending time with Dharma friends. So spending time with friends who also share an interest in Buddhism. So I think just as I can read about the heroes and be inspired by their life's example, I kind of have human heroes or people I'm actually in contact with that I find to be quite heroic as well. And I gain great inspiration from being around friends who are practicing the Dharma. So it can happen, I have to confess, it can happen that when I'm with a Dharma friend, we might both forget what the overarching purpose of our life is. We might start to be a bit silly and speak frivolously. That does happen. But I think most of the time, at least one of us is in touch with that. At least one of us is aware and mindful of what our overarching purpose is. And that means that then the other one starts to be too. And conversation, I think, usually is around the Dharma or is around how we're trying to live meaningful and purposeful lives. So I think that does contribute to this momentum that I've spoken about, that is driving me towards what I truly desire. So the third thing is regular retreats. And there are two aspects to this. So one thing is that I find that going regularly on retreat, I actually disentangle from those things that distract me from what the overarching purpose of my life is. So usually that's browsing the internet, doing too much emailing, Facebooking, texting, that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But I do find personally that they easily draw me into them and pull me away from or out of awareness of what the overarching purpose of my life is. So in the retreat environment, none of that's available, so that can't happen. At least not by those means. But I think the second thing is that the retreat environment it's almost like a mirror. It's a mirror in which I can see what the purpose of my life is. So some people here will have been to Padmasāgara. That's where I've done most of the retreats I've done in my life. And in the shrine room there, the room is just full of artwork, amazing artwork by Aloka. And you're literally surrounded by all these archetypes of enlightenment. It's like the room is full of windows into the enlightened mind. So I think it's really hard not to be aware of the fact that enlightenment is possible and that there are these inspirational figures and representations of that. So also on retreat, there are the other retreatants. So you visibly see people practicing, wanting to engage in spiritual practice, wanting to meditate, wanting to live ethically. Then you have the leaders of the retreats, who are usually experienced people, experienced order members, inspirational figures, people who've given their lives to serving the Dharma. So it's like the retreat environment, the whole retreat environment's geared towards enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And being in that context, that kind of seeps into my skin, makes a deep impression on my mind, which, as I say, then seems to resurface quite spontaneously, almost automatically, instantaneously in those moments when awareness comes, when awareness descends. So maybe people have experienced a bit of that just being here on this weekend. So we're in this amazing Buddhist centre, this amazing building, there's lots of artwork around. We've got a lovely Rupa of the Buddha. There's a thriving Sangha here of inspired people. So the fourth thing, and the last thing I've got down here, is devotional rituals and puja. So I think this mindfulness of purpose, Sampajanna, is an imaginative act. It's an act of the imagination. Dharma Mai said yesterday that it's about imagining what might be possible in the future and imagining our life going in a particular direction. And all the things that I've mentioned so far, this sense of hero worship, being with Dharma friends, empathizing with Dharma friends, being in a retreat environment and surrounded by images of enlightenment, that's all filling our imaginations, feeding the imagination all reminders of the possibility of enlightenment. And this can all inspire us to go for refuge to the three jewels. And I think puja does the same thing. So in puja we are saying verses that conjure up quite amazing imagery. We found that last night. Mandarava, blue lotus and jasmine, incense everywhere. So it all has this effect on the imagination, lifts us up somehow. But I think with puja, whereas the other things are kind of receptive and the things I've described are things I absorb, with puja it's like there's almost more of an explicitly active element. So I'm actively saying things like, this very day I go for refuge to the powerful protectors. I'm actively saying that. So even if I don't necessarily feel it in that particular moment, there's something about the act of declaring it and declaring it publicly that this is the purpose of my life, that I think is all having this effect of generating some sense of momentum and directionality towards a transcendental ideal. Okay, so I'll just finish by summarising what I've said. So I started with a bit about my journey, this journey through life from one purpose to another. And as I said, I feel like that search is over now, and that I am convinced I've found what I do need to do in life. And that is to pursue this noble quest, to seek enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And how I keep that in mind, how I remember that, is quite mysterious. So in those moments of awareness, it doesn't feel like I'm deliberately reminding myself of that, but there is something there of that spirit, there is something there like a momentum or a force or an energy. And that has its origins in the things I've done in the past. So it has its origins in the broad range of practices that we do within the Triratna community, and specifically in those areas that I've discussed, those 4 areas. And I just wanted to finish by indulging in some hero worship. So I've got a poem here by Bhante, by Sangha, and it's called The Wind. So some of you will be familiar with it. And I think it just really captures quite nicely how that sense of purpose in life can feel like a force or an energy. And I think it also captures some sense of the mysteriousness of the arising of that force and that energy. A wind was in my sails. It blew stronger and fiercer, hour by hour. I did not know from whence it came, or why. I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks. Sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy. Sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still, now I am old. It lives in me, its breath, my breath, its will, my will.